Um,
Brad is.
Oh, we're live. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bug Basics with some entomologists. Today, we're going to tell you the basic anatomy and structures of an insect, so how you can ID some common insects and tell them apart from some non-insects. So, without further ado, let's have our first entomologist explain.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a graduate student at UC Riverside and I research harvester ants and how they interact with plants. But today I'm going to go over with you some bug basics. More specifically, I'll go briefly over how to identify whether something's an insect or not. Okay. So, if you can, grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can draw with me at the end of this really short presentation an insect. So, here are a group of insects, and they all have something in common that's really obvious, and that's that they all have 6 legs. And all insects have 6 legs. So we can determine whether the following pictures are insects or not based on this simple fact. So although you can't see all 6 legs on this weevil, you can assume that there are 3 other ones on the other side because insects are symmetrical. So it is an insect. Whereas the spider is not, because it obviously has 8. A cockroach is an insect because it has 6 legs, whereas a centipede is not because it has way more legs than I wish to count. A butterfly is an insect because if you look at its little skinny legs, it has 6. Whereas my personal favorite, the roly-poly, unfortunately is not an insect, but is a crustacean. So it's more closely related to like shrimp or crabs. And while not everything that I showed you is an insect, they all fit into the category of arthropod, which means that they have an exoskeleton, a segmented body, and paired appendages. And so to go off of that, an appendage, of course, is like your arms or legs, and insects have way more appendages than just legs. They have wings, that's considered an appendage, antennae, and mouth parts. And these will look different depending on what insect you're looking at. And so let's talk about antennae. Each insect has 2 antennae. Here this ant has 2. This cricket has 2. The stink bug has 2 antennae. And so that's another good way to identify whether you're looking at an insect or not. And now let's talk about other features of an insect. They have 3 main body parts that I'm going to talk about. The first one is pretty easy to remember. It's just the head, which is then attached to the thorax, which is the middle part. And then the abdomen, which is always attached to the thorax. And even though not all insects look like this nice velvet ant here, they do have all 3 of these parts. And so the legs will always be attached to our thorax, while the antennae are attached to the head. And then our abdomen will always be attached to our thorax here. And another unique thing about insects is that they always have these 2 antennae with usually eyes and really interesting mouth parts. So this guy has mouth parts that can grab at its food. As you may know, butterflies have their proboscis for sipping nectar, and then For example, aphids, which have like a stabby mouth part to drink sap. But now that we have all of our key components, we're going to draw our favorite insect knowing this. So you can draw a butterfly, a ladybug, an insect that you think looks really cool. And we're going to make sure it has its head, thorax, abdomen, and its 3 legs. The 2 antennae, the eyes on its head, and if your insect has wings, the wings are in the thorax, and then, of course, its mouth parts. And if you would like, when you are done with your drawing, you can share it on the Riverside Insect Fair Facebook page in a comment section. Okay. So I'm going to, real quick, share another screen. Okay. So I'm going to draw my favorite insect, which is the velvet ant, which is a misnomer. Velvet ant is actually a wasp. So first we're going to start with the head, right? And on the head, if you'll recall, we have our 2 eyes. Right? And then we have our 2 antennae, which are between the eyes. Cool. I'm going to be fancy and color them in. Okay. And then we're going to do the thorax. So, oops, wrong color. Now, one of my favorite parts about the velvet ant is that its thorax is nice red color. Let me make sure. Okay, there we go. And then, of course, attached to our thorax, we have our 6 legs, which I will be drawing in the joints. So it's going to be thin legs. Right now we kind of have a spider-looking creature because it only has its head and its thorax. And then we're going to draw the abdomen. I kind of ran out of space there. That's okay. And because it's a velvet wasp, I'm going to draw some nice stripes onto it. There we go. And because I want to show you where the wings are, I'm going to draw a male velvet ant, which has 4 wings. And the wings will always be attached to the thorax. The male is a bit different from the female because 1, it has wings, and 2, it's very small. But these critters you can see crawling around maybe at the Sycamore Canyon Park or Box Spring Mountains. Now I will hand it off to whomever is speaking next.
That's me. So hi everyone, I'm Mari West. I'm also a graduate student at UC Riverside here in the entomology department. And I mainly study ant behavior, but today I'm actually going to be showing you some of the live insects that we would normally have at an in-person insect fair. Some insects that are really easy to handle and are very common pets. So let's see. First, I will start with a very common beetle that I need to find. Here we go. So this guy here is a very common beetle in this area, if you're local to Southern California. They're found in very dry areas, desert areas. You probably have seen them if you've walked around hiking, like at Sycamore Canyon or in the Box Springs Mountains or other local mountains. All throughout the desert, if you've been to Joshua Tree, you'll see these guys there as well. So these are commonly referred to as stink beetles, and that is because they are able to spray a noxious substance that smells pretty bad out of the tip of their abdomen, which is right here, basically the tips of their butts. And they do this as a defense mechanism. So you've probably seen these guys often if you walk by them on the path. They'll start to kind of tilt their abdomen upwards. So it kind of looks like they're doing a headstand almost. They're trying to do a headstand. And that's kind of a warning display of them telling you, hey, if you get any closer, I might spray you with something kind of stinky. But we have quite a few of these in our outreach insect collection. We bring them around to schools, obviously not lately because of the pandemic, but ours are pretty used to being handled, and so we don't really have them displaying that behavior too often, luckily, so we can handle them pretty nicely. Let's see. They are also sometimes referred to as pinacate beetles, which is Spanish for black beetle, and they'll eat lots of different plant matter. We feed them like apples and things like that. They're pretty docile. They don't really bite. Great pets or temporary pets, and cool to see out in the wild here. So that is our pinacate or stink beetle. And then next I'm going to show you a roach. So they're a little faster than the beetles are, but this is referred to as a death's head cockroach. And I'm going to try to show you, so it might be a little difficult because this guy is running around, why that is. They have a little black mark, you see right here, on their pronotum, which is actually extending from the thorax that Rebecca was talking about. And it basically covers the head of the roach, which is right here. And that black mark to some people kind of looks like a skull. So they're commonly referred to as death's head cockroaches. But as you can see, aside from trying to run away from me, they're pretty nice to handle. It's not going to bite me. This is another insect that eats plant matter, so they eat like rotting wood and vegetation. They like to hide in leaves and in rotting bark. And one cool thing, so you might notice that beetles and roaches sort of look similar to each other, and a lot of people confuse the two. Ooh, that guy jumped. However, there are some good differences that you can look out for. So they're completely different orders of insect. And one of the things that you can see is that this guy, the roach, has pretty soft wings, whereas the beetle that I showed you earlier has hardened wings on the top. So the first pair of wings, or the top pair of wings, is hardened to cover the membranous wings, or the soft wings, underneath, and those are called elytra. And most beetles have hardened elytra like that, whereas roaches do not. Let's see. I will show you as well. Actually, another thing that's different between many beetles and roaches is that a lot of roaches are actually gregarious, which means they like to live in groups and associate with one another. So the parents will actually take pretty good care of the babies. There's a really common misconception that roaches are dirty, but they're actually very clean. They groom their babies, they take care of their babies, they feed their babies. And so I'm just showing you another death's head cockroach, but this is a juvenile that doesn't have wings yet. So I think Ian will talk a little bit about the life cycle of an insect, but there are a few different ways that insects grow and develop. Some of them include basically smaller versions of the adults, and then they start to grow wing buds, which are smaller wings, until they grow fully grown wings, whereas other insects will go through complete metamorphosis, which I think Ian will talk about later as well. But yeah, this is a juvenile death's head cockroach. I'm going to show you another roach next, which is a pretty exciting one. It is called a Madagascar hissing cockroach, and that is because, well, they're from Madagascar, which is just off of Africa. Oops, that one jumped too. And they also hiss. So if you can see these little black dots on the side of the abdomen, those are called spiracles, and they help the insect to breathe. So that the insect can take oxygen in and release carbon dioxide out of those spiracles. And these roaches have a specialized spiracle on the on part of their abdomen. So just one pair of their spiracles is specialized to release air really rapidly when they're alarmed, or sometimes they'll do it when they're trying to attract mates or when they're fighting with one another. And so when they release that air really rapidly, it can create a hissing sound that can be alarming, but also helps them to communicate with one another. So it's both a predator defense, so it defends them from things that might want to eat them by maybe scaring them off, but it can also help them to communicate with one another or show how strong they are between males. So the males will fight over females sometimes, and they'll make lots of loud hissing sounds, and they basically have a hissing contest, and whoever makes the loudest hiss is the dominant one, and the other one will back off and let the other guy have the female. So one way that you can tell the males and the females apart in this species is you can see here on the thorax of this guy, he has two little bumps, which we refer to as horns, and the females don't have that. Otherwise, both the males and the females in this species are wingless, so they never grow wings. And similar to the death's head cockroaches, they like to live in detritus and eat plant materials, so they'll eat decaying leaves, they'll hang out in logs. And I don't think I can get this guy to hiss for you, because similar to the Penacante beetles, these guys have been handled quite a bit, and so they're pretty used to it. But the hiss is pretty cool. Yeah, so this is our Madagascar hissing cockroach. Very common pets, and very docile. As you can see, this guy's not running around quite as much as the other roach was. All right. Let's see here. Sorry, this guy is hanging on to me. He wants to stay. Okay, so the next insect I'll show you guys is the Vietnamese walking stick. So these guys have a special kind of camouflage that allows them to look like sticks or branches on a tree. They'll often hang out on the tree. This guy is waving his arms around right now, or actually this girl, I should say, is waving her arms around right now, trying to find a branch that she can move to. But typically once they find a spot that they're satisfied with, they'll hold their two arms out in front of them like this, and that improves their camouflage a little bit more, because instead of looking more like an insect with 6 legs, they look more like a twig with only 4 little protrusions coming out. So a lot of predators of insects have learned to recognize the 6-legged pattern of insects, and they'll actually, or this will help to protect them from anything that's looking for something that has 6 legs. Let's see. These guys, they do have males, but they're pretty rare. So actually, generally, they will reproduce parthenogenically, which basically just means that the females will lay eggs without mating to reproduce. And it takes about a month or so for the eggs to develop into tiny stick insects. And the stick insects, once they hatch, look pretty much exactly like the adults, just super teeny tiny. Yeah, so these guys are from Vietnam. They eat a lot of vegetation, so they're, again, plant-eating insects. They won't bite. These guys like to eat on blackberry, hawthorn, maple, oak, and rose sometimes, but you won't find them around here in the wild because, again, they're from Vietnam. And then I have one other insect to show you, but we actually don't have many of them in our colony right now, so I'm going to show you a short video, which I will share on my screen. Just give me 1 second here. So what I'll show you is another stick insect, or actually we refer to it as a leaf insect often. And these are from Australia. So this is a video that another graduate student at UCR, Megan Greenwood, and it'll just be a short video about the Australian walking sticks. Can you all see the video? Cool.
Next, I'll show you these beautiful Australian walking sticks, which are masters of the skies, and they look a lot like a dead leaf, which is another common name for them, the dead leaf insect. I'm also showing the tarsi, or feet of the stick insect here, because they're just really, really cool. They have small hooks on the end that help them to grab things, and then a small pad in the middle.
All right, so that's about it for the insects that I have to show you, but then I'm going to turn it over to Ian, who's going to show you some awesome photographs of even more insects and other arthropods.
Awesome. Thank you, Mari. Thanks, Rebecca. Those are some just amazing critters. And what's so cool about insects is the body plan Rebecca talked about can be adapted into so many different things. It's just phenomenal. So I'm Ian. I'm a researcher with UC Riverside Entomology. And what I want to talk to you about today is talking about insects and arthropods generally. Let me go share a PowerPoint. But mostly just to talk about how freaking cool they are. Arthropods are just amazing. One of the coolest things, as I say, I find about insects and arthropods generally, insects are a type of arthropod, we can talk a little bit more about that, is just how diverse they are. Look at this slide. These are all photos I've taken over the last few years, and so this just represents me with a camera walking around and catching a few critters. This isn't even close to the diversity we would see in a single state or this country or on the planet. But what's so fascinating is that all these arthropods, there's a few spiders in here, but at least with the insects, all the insects share the exact same body plan. They all have that head, thorax, abdomen, 6 legs, 3 pair of legs, 2 pair of antennae, mouth parts. But you can see how diverse they are in this doodlebug, this antlion larvae. Those mouth parts are big, biting, chomping mandibles. You can see some with wings, others without wings, some with hardened wings, like the beetles, the elytra there. They take this basic body plan, and insects have evolved to change this body plan in ways that suit their environment, suit their behaviors, and adapt to their biology, and results in this amazing diversity. So I'll share this graphic from one of my favorite entomology textbooks, the Cranston and Dolan textbook. And what's so cool about this image is they've had an artist draw a representative creature of all these different large groups of organisms on the planet. at relative scale, relative to how diverse they are, how many species there are in that group. So if you're looking, obviously the biggest thing is this fly. Insects are clearly the most diverse organisms on the planet. There's near about, if not over 1 million described species of insects, just of insects on the planet. And estimates are upwards of 10 or more million that remain undescribed that we just don't even know about, we haven't discovered yet. There are just that many insects. If you're looking for us, we are this little kangaroo right there represents mammals. There's only a few tens of thousands of mammals, tens of thousands of birds, frogs, fish. There's a couple 100,000 of those. But you get into other arthropods like mites, spiders, chelicerates. We can talk about all what those mean. There's easily hundreds of thousands of those, if not millions, that we just don't quite know. Nematodes are huge diversity. Trees are quite diverse. Trees and plants and flowering plants quite diverse. But again, this graphic just shows insects absolutely run the world. We would be lost without them as far as ecosystem functioning. And again, they are the dominant organism on the planet, except maybe for humans. But when you really get into it, there's about hundreds and hundreds of individual insects for every one human on the planet, by far, for sure. That diversity extends to everything in insects. Bees, you typically think of a bee as a good example of sort of a generic insect that most people know about. Typically, most people think about a honeybee, right? And a honeybee is actually an introduced insect to this country, to the USA. They're from Europe, and they're domesticated kind of like a chicken or cattle, and they help pollinate, but they're not a native bee. Here are two native bees that are actually in the same family as honeybees. So these are closely related. Again, they share the same body plan. But even within the same family, you have a bee on the left, a nomada bee, and a bee on the right, an Anthophora, that look completely different than, say, a honeybee, even though these are all pretty closely related. So that diversity scales everything from the species to the family level to the order level. There are so many different types of insects that do things in so many different ways. So, sorry, there's my mic again. So that's one of the things I find most fascinating about insects. They exhibit a huge array of behaviors. So you might think of predation as, lions on the Serengeti or a cheetah running down a prey. But you can see this kind of National Geographic documentary footage just right in your backyard on the lawn, on the grass, outside. This is a jumping spider doing what jumping spiders do best, pouncing on her prey. Arthropods are incredible predators. If you watch any of their panels, you know about biocontrol and how we can use arthropods, in this case these are spiders that I've been showing, to help control. There's an insect, so this spider has 8 legs, the insect has 6 legs that it's feeding on. But spiders are excellent biocontrol for pest insects in your yard, or to control the spread of invasive species, things like that, because they are such effective predators, and they're these little small micro machines that get into places where it's difficult to do a pesticide or to try to physically remove something. You can use the spider behavior to your advantage to control pest populations. Spiders also exhibit really cool courtship behaviors, especially jumping spiders. Again, you talk about birds of paradise doing the crazy mating displays. Man, forget that. Let's talk arthropods. Arthropods do amazing behavioral rituals and dances. The male jumping spiders will drum on the substrate and communicate to the females, sing a song to the females to say, hey, don't eat me, but mate with me. Let's reproduce. Insect flight is phenomenal and incredible. We talked about beetles having a hardened pair of wings called the elytra that rest above their membranous pair of flight wings. And insects invented flight something like 400 million years ago. That's way before. If you think of flight, you think first of birds. Maybe you think bats or pterosaurs, right? Dinosaurs that could fly. But insects invented that hundreds of millions of years before that even came on the scene. They were the first flighted organisms on the planet. Flight is just amazing. It helps these organisms disperse, get to their environment. It helps them pollinate plants and get nectar and food for their offspring. But insects are then inexorably tied to plants as their primary source of reproduction for the plant, as pollinators for the plant. And insect diversity has exploded in a commensurate rate with plant diversity. They've helped each other diversify and evolve. Insect flight is just phenomenal, and virtually all insects can do it. There are some groups of insects that have lost wings. Ancestrally, they all had wings, at least the typical insects that we think of. And a few have lost wings for various reasons, to get in under and live among ants, or to burrow underground, or because they rely on pheromones for their mates to come and find them. They have all these kind of different ways of communicating and different behaviors that you might not necessarily see if you're just thinking about mammals, maybe coyotes or dogs, or you understand that behavior. There's so much going on with insects and with arthropods. Again, all based on the basics of what an arthropod does. Their reproductive biology is amazingly diverse, just as diverse as they are. This is a toe biter, a bellostomatid bug. This is the male that's exhibiting paternal care. The female will lay eggs on this male's back in this species, and the male will then become like a seahorse. He travels around and he moves the eggs from pond to pond until they hatch and takes care of them, which is really cool. Like we kind of talked about, most insects, there's sort of two major ways insects reproduce. One of those is by laying an egg, having the egg hatch, and as you can see here in these stink bugs that just hatched out of these little barrel-shaped eggs are basically smaller versions of the adult. They just get bigger and bigger, and eventually at their last molt, they gain wings and can fly off and can reproduce, right? Other insects do what's called holometaboly, or have complete metamorphosis, which is that's the typical butterfly that actually pupate inside a pupal shell and completely transform and turn into something else. So I have a couple of videos showing that. This is a citrus swallowtail, a giant swallowtail. Oh, I don't know what keeps going on with my mic. There we go. But here you can see the citrus swallowtail gearing up to pupate. This is the larvae that spins a little line and attaches itself to a plant, and then it sheds its final skin and grows into this pupal case, inside of which it will pupate, turn into a butterfly, and emerge out with butterfly wings. You can actually see the wing pads forming there. And then this is what happens. This is a different butterfly species, but this is what happens when they push their way out of that pupal case and inflate their wings. They're pumping their blood into their wings, because again, these insects, they don't have bones, they don't have a structure to hold the wings up. So what they use is a series of tubes and veins that form the structure as they pump blood into their hemolymph into their wings, and then they dry, and then they form this rigid membrane that insects can use to fly off. There's so many cool things about insects. One last thing we'll just kind of touch on, and then hopefully we can field a bunch of questions from you guys about, why are insects so cool? Is just a gee whiz wow photo of a scorpion that fluoresces with UV light. We as scientists don't even know exactly why they do this and exactly how they do this. But it's fascinating. What's really interesting too is it's clearly a compound in their exoskeleton. We talked about they don't have bones. These arthropods, of which insects are a part, have to shed that skeleton to grow bigger and bigger. And what's interesting with scorpions, their exoskeleton fluoresces in UV. And what's really neat is when they shed their skin, even the shed molt, the skin just itself, will fluoresce in ultraviolet light. And if you put a scorpion into alcohol, which you do to collect it and curate it in a museum so that we can study it for years and years and years, the alcohol fluoresces, which is just totally mind-blowing. We have no idea what's going on with that. And if you point a UV flashlight at a jumping spider, for example, you might even find that jumping spiders fluoresce. And a lot of these organisms might use this as another means of communication that we as humans just can't even perceive because we don't have, our eyes physically can't see UV light. But many spiders and insects can perceive UV. They can perceive UV on their plants, on the flowers that they're trying to pollinate, or they can see each other in a landscape using these different methods of sort of communication than you might otherwise think about as us, a mammal with bones and typical color vision. So that's my spiel, is just how cool arthropods and insects are and just how neat they are. And again, we've talked about sort of the basics, the basic structures, the basics of what they do. And what's amazing, what's mind-blowing about arthropods is just how they've taken that simple plan and run with it and have become the dominant force on this planet. So they're really cool. I hope you guys have lots of questions, get to go out and observe and try to, if you take anything away from this insect fair, absolutely go outside and just look at insects, just stare at them and see just how cool they are. Look for those structures we talked about. Look for the behaviors. You know, you can watch a whole National Geographic documentary just in the bush outside your yard. So I've got a live spider, a tarantula, that I can hold up and show you guys and demonstrate the differences between a spider and an insect. So I'll go ahead and do that. But otherwise, we can take some questions and discuss those if anybody has any. So let me pull that spider out.
Thank you, all of you panelists, for sharing about how to build a bug and sharing some local as well as some other exotic insects, and for sharing the diversity. We have one question in the chat so far. As a reminder to everyone, you can post on YouTube or on the Facebook page or in the Zoom with your questions, and I will read them to the panelists. Our first question is, do we have a good population of bees in Riverside?
I can take a quick stab at answering that. Actually, probably some of the other panelists will know better than I do. Let me first just quickly show, here's a tarantula, a Chilean rose-haired tarantula called Rosie. And again, you can, for those folks at home, you can count the legs. She'll actually look like she might have 10 legs, and that's because she has another pair of appendages, her pedipalps, right on the very front of her head. Those are sort of modified appendages that she can kind of use for walking. They're not truly real legs. So spiders have 8 legs and 2 body parts, and insects have 6 legs and 3 body parts, among other differences. So go ahead and do your drawings and share them on the Facebook. That'd be awesome to do. So yeah, the question was about native bees.
Just bee populations in general. So if you could take a stab about explaining the difference between that, or share that with.
Yeah, you froze, Tessa. Bee populations in general, we have quite good populations of bees in Southern California. Southern California, especially actually the desert Southern California, is actually quite a little hotspot for bee diversity. And again, though, I'm less talking about honeybees than I am about native bee species. Honeybees are trucked all up and down the state of California. Actually, honeybees, we might have the largest population of honeybees on the planet in California, because we as humans use them to pollinate a great deal of crops, especially things like almonds, a lot of our cherry crops and things like that, a lot of our tree crops, nut and tree crops. So we truck beehives over to different orchards when they're in bloom, and we release the bees to go pollinate, and then obviously you can also produce honey and things like that from them. Now, so there's huge populations of those, and that's typically what you're going to see in your house or your yard. There are just so many honeybees that are so highly cultivated that that's probably the most common bee that you'll see in your yard or in your neighborhood. But keep an eye out for these other native bees. Most of them are solitary. So while we have good populations of them, there are a great number of them and a great number of species. Many of them just aren't as abundant, for example, as a honeybee. They just aren't in the densities that you would see there. But you'll occasionally see things like there's very good populations of carpenter bees, which tend to nest in wood, so they might be in your fences. Or if you have a wood pile out in your yard, you'll probably see these large black, and some of them are gold, beautiful gold color. Valley carpenter bees, for example. You might see those around. You might see those photos of the bees I first posted, and you'll notice that they fly differently and they sound differently when they fly. So yeah, most of those bees, the leafcutter bees and the miner bees, things like that, most of them tend to be solitary. They don't have a hive. They just make a small nest, usually in the ground, and lay a single egg on a ball of pollen or something like that. So their numbers are much lower, but in Southern California, we actually have quite a good diversity of different species of native bees.
So I'll just add a few things to that. So everything that Ian said was great, and I'll just give you guys a few tips on how you can support native bee populations in your own backyard. So one really easy thing to do, and pretty straightforward and simple, is to plant some native flowering plants in your backyard or in your garden to provide some food for bees and other pollinators. So bees will both consume the pollen from plants as well as the nectar, which honeybees will turn into their honey, but other bees just eat as is. And then another thing that you can do is to provide nesting habitat. So there are quite a few different ways that bees nest. So some bees are ground nesters, which means that they like to nest in the ground, and often dry dirt patches are good for that kind of thing, hard packed soil. So if you want to create some of those little spots in your backyard, if you don't care about having green grass, that's a great way to provide some nesting habitat for ground nesting bees. But then there are also a lot of cavity nesting bees, which like to nest in really narrow, some often cylindrical cavities. So, for example, they'll nest in hollowed out twigs in nature. So you can both just leave some of that stuff in your backyard if it's there and it's not a nuisance to you. Don't remove it. That's good nesting habitat for bees. But you can also create your own bee nesting boxes by putting an array of straws or different cylindrical cavities that are of varying diameters out together in a little bee house to provide a nice little tube for lots of different bees to nest in. And then I would like to go back to the UV bugs because I have a few more photos and I have a few more things to say about the UV bugs if I can do that. And then I'll also note here really quickly, Ian, your video has been off. So if you wanted to show the tarantula off again after I show the UV insects, that'd be great. So I'm just going to show a few more UV bugs. I'm saying bugs here because actually most of the insects that glow, or most of the bugs that glow under UV light, are actually not insects, they're arachnids. So this is a scorpion, which is an arachnid. It has 8 legs. The front 2 legs have pinchers, so they're modified to have these pinchers, and then they have a tail with a stinger on the end, which they can use to inject venom into their prey most often. Like Ian was saying before, there's a compound in their exoskeleton that causes this glow under UV light, and we don't really know too much about why they do it, though there are a few theories that I'll go into. So this is another cool desert arachnid. This is called a sulfugid. Often they'll hang out under rocks and things. They're pretty hard to spot, but if you go out into the desert and you have a UV flashlight and you walk around at night, you might see quite a few of them, especially on warm evenings. So that's true of both scorpions and sulfugids. You'll see them frequently in the desert on warm evenings. And if you have a UV light, that helps a lot. So sulfugids are arachnids. Again, they have 8 legs. You can't really see them in this photo, but they have pretty big jaws, and they could potentially have a pretty nasty bite, but they don't have any venom at all, so you don't have to worry about any after effects of getting bitten, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you handle them out in the wild. And then finally, this was actually a pretty surprising find for me. I was walking around in the desert one night where I was camping, and we had our UV flashlights, and we were scanning the ground with them to see if we could find any scorpions or sulfugids, and we came across these crickets that actually fluoresce under UV light as well. And I'm not aware of many other insects that actually fluoresce under UV light like this, so I was pretty surprised. So I think, as Ian mentioned before, there are lots of arachnids that fluoresce under UV light, and there's also lots of other things, particularly in the desert, that seem to fluoresce. So I would highly recommend, if you like to go camping, particularly in the desert, that you invest in a UV flashlight. They're not that expensive, and it'll make your camping trip more fun to walk around the desert, scan the ground with the UV light, and see if you can spot any cool arachnids or insects. You might also see things like lichen glowing under UV light. A lot of flowers will glow under UV light, and many other things in the desert that you would be very surprised to see. So going into some of the theories about why they might be glowing under UV light, there are a few things. None of them have been confirmed, really. It's a very understudied topic. But one potential mechanism is, as I mentioned before, flowers will often glow under UV light. And so maybe a lot of these arachnids are hanging out on flowers and kind of using the UV background as camouflage for them. So that's one theory. Another theory is that, particularly for the arachnids, which often prey on sometimes other arachnids or insects, which are often attracted to UV patterns in the environment, they might be using their own UV exoskeletons to attract prey to them. And then another thing that might happen is they might actually be using it to communicate with one another. We don't really know. A lot of arachnids do not have very good vision. They actually mainly rely on vibratory cues in order to locate their prey and mates. But some arachnids, like that jumping spider that Ian showed you, have very, very good vision, and some arachnids have extremely good vision at night. And so they might actually be using the UV light or the UV glow to attract each other or communicate with each other somehow. So yeah, just a few extra cool things about glowing arachnids and insects.
Nice. Thanks for that. We're still waiting for some more questions, but I actually have a question. So at the beginning of this, we had, presented by Rebecca, draw a bug, and she drew for us her favorite, which is the velvet wasp, actually, rather than the velvet ant. And I was wondering, why would the male have wings and not the female? And does this happen with other insects?
I'm not an expert on velvet ants, but I would guess from what Ian was saying earlier is that the females do burrow because they parasitize burrowing, other burrowing bees and wasps, and so the wings may hinder that. And the males, I would guess, have wings so that they can disperse and find mates. And other instances of that I know of are like in ants. The males always have wings, and the female workers don't usually, but the foundress queens do, and they eventually shed those off. And if other people have other examples of that, we can add on.
Absolutely, I'll say all of that is exactly right. And there are even some moths and a number of insects, for example, that are truly larviform. They don't even look anything like an adult insect. They almost look more like a larva. And again, those are typically, that's the female that she is local to a burrow or in her habitat. She doesn't need wings to move around or disperse because she wants to make a nest. And she attracts males to her, usually using pheromones. She sends out her perfume, and the males that have wings, they fly around on the landscape and they go, ooh, I smell something nice over there, and they'll go find the female and and mate with them. And then there are a few groups of insects that don't have any wings at all. That's pretty rare. That may happen in some aquatic insects and things like that. Or there are beetles like those stink beetles that Mari showed earlier that their elytra are fused together. So they're very protective because they form this hard shell. But interestingly, then they can't fly. But they don't need to because they run around on the ground and get all their food and their, find mates and things like that just walking around on the ground. So can people see my video now? Oh, that's so weird. Sorry, you guys. I don't know why. Is that up?
Hey, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, just had to turn it off and turn it back on again. Typical of all technology. But I just wanted to show off again that tarantula. So there she is. This is a Chilean rosehair tarantula. And again, if you actually count the appendages, there's 10 things that look like legs, but these ones right there up in those two little ones right there are called pedipalps. And again, that's what is modified into pinchers and scorpions, things like that. That's another tool arthropods can use to modify. They can. It's like having a drill that you can put different attachments on or something like that. All these arthropods have different ways they work in the environment. So this is just a really cool, nice big tarantula for you guys, in case anyone wants to draw a spider.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. So we got a comment on Facebook, and it was, would it be trippy if we found one of these fluorescing insects in our homes? And that made me wonder, what are some of the most common insects or rare insects that we might find in our homes, and could any of them be the fluorescent kind?
So I'll comment at least on the common ones. So some of the most commonly seen insects that I've seen in people's homes are ants, particularly around here. Mainly I've been seeing Argentine ants, which are an invasive pest from Argentina, as their name suggests. They're pretty small, brownish colored ants. And they actually don't do super well in dry environments. And so oftentimes you'll see them come into your home looking for water sources on really hot, dry days. But they'll also be attracted to any sugary substances that you might have lying around on your counter. So if you put some honey in your tea in the morning and you accidentally drip some onto your counter, they'll come in and eat that right up. They love sugar. All ants love sugar. And so that's one way that you can kind of prevent ants from entering your home. But like I said, a really common thing around here, especially on dry, hot days, is ants seeking water. So it's kind of hard to control that. I've also seen quite a few of these small black ants, which I believe are Taphonoma, entering people's homes. I don't know too much about them, whether or not they're native to this area. My guess is not. But they seem to get into any teeny tiny little crack by the windowsill or anywhere else in your home, particularly if you have an older house. And then I guess another pretty common insect, which most people don't like to have in their house, are German cockroaches, which are from Germany, as their name suggests. They're also invasive pests, and they will scavenge for any crumbs of food that you might have left on your floor. They like to hide in dark places, so they'll often be under your refrigerator or under your stove during the day, and then they'll come out at night and eat all the crumbs off your floor. But so I like to say, as I mentioned before, a lot of cockroaches are actually pretty clean. They keep themselves pretty clean. So if you have cockroaches in your house, it's really your floor or your house that's dirty and not the cockroach. So I totally understand why you might not want to have them in there.
And I'll add quick to say that, as Mari suggested, getting a UV light is fantastic for when you're out camping. It can also be really fun to go around your house and see if you can find, and can actually be a safety thing. There are occasionally scorpions and things like that get into homes and people's bathrooms or bathtubs because then they can't escape up out. turning the lights off and getting a couple of UV flashlights off Amazon or something might be a fun activity for the kids. Go look around, see if you can find some scorpions, and then please just let them go. You know, they don't want to harm you. And as we talked about outside of the yard, probably the most common thing you'll find out there is honeybees. They're just so abundant. But look out for those native bees. We have a lot of native butterflies. Monarchs are migrating through. They feed on milkweed, so if you plant milkweed in your yard, we talked about it on another panel, but I would highly encourage people to plant native plants in their yard. That can be another great source of habitat, nesting material, food source, for example, for insects, especially the native insects, which are not doing as well as cultivated ones or are susceptible to invasion from other invasive species, competition from those. So planting native plants in your yard is a great way to encourage more native insects, and you'll just see a lot more stuff once you start paying attention to them and where to see them.
I've got another question or concern from the comments, and this is regarding cockroaches, and that can cockroaches in our homes feed off of dead skin and eyelashes so that even the cleanliness of your home doesn't matter? And we ourselves are a food source, or are we not?
I have never heard that before, and I highly doubt it. So a lot of cockroaches, as I mentioned before, eat mostly decaying plant material, so they probably wouldn't be attracted to things like your skin cells or nail clippings. I don't see that those would be very nutritious things for them or tasty substances. So that's probably just one of those scary myths that people put out there about insects. Particularly cockroaches seem to be widely hated, even though there are plenty of really cool species that are awesome pets.
Thanks for that. Yeah, there's a lot of urban legends about insects as well as arachnids. And in this last moment, I wanted to address one of my favorite urban legends and see if one of you entomologists want to talk about it. Are daddy longlegs the most venomous of spiders?
I can speak to that. Absolutely not. That's completely wrong. It's a great myth. There's the myth that they're highly venomous, but that their fangs are so small that they can't actually pierce your skin or any variant on that. Totally not true. They are venomous. They have venom. They use their venom to kill and subdue their prey. And they have mandibles. They can bite. I've never been bitten by a daddy longlegs or a cellar spider, the family Pholcidae. I've never been bitten by one. I bet they could probably pierce skin, but again, they are so reluctant to bite, and you would have to probably hold it and stick it on your finger and say, hey, really, come on, come try to bite me. But yeah, so they are venomous. They're not so venomous that they'll kill you in an instant. Interestingly, you can measure venom by LD50, which is the measure of like how toxic the venom is, and a smaller dose that can kill more things, or a larger animal, for example, is more toxic. So the most toxic insect in North America is actually the harvester ant. If you measure it by LD50, it's the most potent, as it were. But they inject such small amounts of venom that obviously it's not going to kill you. Again, there are lethal insects out there, some of the black widows, some of the scorpions, especially if you get a bite or a sting and it's left untreated. Those can be fatal. So if you do have any concerns or you do get bit, I would seek medical attention, obviously. But for the most part, you're totally fine.
I'll just add one more thing regarding that myth. So I believe that myth came about because there was an observation that a daddy longlegs had killed a black widow spider. And this is most likely not because the venom is more potent. Obviously, we know that that's not true, but actually rather that the daddy longleg has much longer legs and so was more easily able to wrap up the black widow spider with its silk and inject the venom. And the venom that daddy longlegs have, though it's not as potent as a black widow spider's venom, is still potent enough to kill another small insect or spider. And so that's kind of where that myth started. But I think it's kind of a fun story how science can kind of go awry in that way.
All right. Thanks for the answers, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I think we're just about out of time, so I don't want to be mid-answer while we finish up. So thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the insect fair.